Darker Than Night, 1975. Four young women move into a sprawling, gloomy mansion inherited by one of them from her recently deceased Aunt Susanna. The inheritance comes with a single bizarre condition. They must provide total care for Susanna's beloved black cat, Becker. However, the women are more interested in their fashionable, modern lifestyles than the needs of a pet. When the cat dies due to their callous neglect, a series of terrifying supernatural events is unleashed. The aunt's vengeful spirit begins to manifest, and the women are picked off one by one as the house itself turns against them. Director Carlos Enrique Taboada was the master of Mexican Gothic horror, and this film is widely considered one of his finest works. The cast, led by Claudia Islas, perfectly portrays a group of privileged youths whose modern skepticism is no match for old-world superstition. As the hauntings escalate, their fashionable world collides with a cold, supernatural retribution that refuses to be ignored. The mansion is the film's greatest asset, a maze of shadowy corridors and ornate, sinister decor that becomes increasingly claustrophobic. The deaths are supernaturally orchestrated, using the environment to create accidents, like drownings and falls. Taboada relies on masterful sound design and lighting, rather than expensive special effects. The sound of the dead cat meowing through the vents is far more unsettling than a monster suit could ever be. Darker Than Night, or Más Negro que la Noche, plays its haunted house mechanics with a grim, serious tone. It explores the idea that some curses are triggered by simple apathy, and that once the balance of a house is broken, it cannot be restored. It remains the essential viewing for those who appreciate atmospheric horror, where the dread is built through shadow and silence rather than jump scares. White Line Fever, 1975. Carol Jo Hummer just wants an honest living, a truck, a route, and a shot at the American dream. But when he returns from the Air Force and discovers that the freight business is rotting from the inside, he finds himself up against a syndicate that runs the roads through corruption and intimidation. When they push too far, he pushes back, with his rig as his weapon. White Line Fever is part action film, part working-class rebellion. Jan Michael Vincent gives one of his best performances as a man whose decency turns to fury, taking on a system that's stacked against him. Director Jonathan Kaplan brings the world of long-haul trucking to life with grit and realism. The clanking of gears, the endless highways, the loneliness of the cab. When the movie erupts into action, it's with the force of someone who's had enough. The truck itself becomes an extension of Hummer's defiance, crashing through roadblocks and corrupt power structures alike. It's a story about justice, but also pride, about what happens when the people holding everything together decide they won't be pushed anymore. Like many great 70s action films, it's rough around the edges and full of conviction. White Line Fever may be about trucks, but at its core, it's a story about resistance. A reminder that sometimes the only way forward is straight through the barricade. Asylum, 1972. A young psychiatrist arrives at a grim, secluded asylum to interview for a job. To prove his worth, the facility's director tasks him with a twisted game. Interview 4 inmates and identify which one is the asylum's former head doctor. What follows is an anthology of 4 dark, interconnected tales of terror, all penned by psycho author Robert Bloch. From a freezer hiding a gruesome reanimated secret to a tailor crafting a suit from a mysterious, magical fabric, the stories are macabre, stylish, and surreal. Directed by Roy Ward Baker, the film is a high point for Britain's Amicus studio. The atmosphere is thick with British horror royalty, including Peter Cushing, Herbert Lom, and Charlotte Rampling, who anchor the anthology with performances that balance the campy premise with genuine dread. The practical effects provide a tactile, handmade charm that defines the era. Asylum works because of its tight narrative structure. The framing story keeps the tension high, blurring the line between doctor and patient until the final, twist-filled reveal. It's a definitive piece of 70s portmanteau horror that proves the creepiest place to be is trapped in someone else's madness. Ganja and Hess, 1973. Bill Gunn's masterpiece is a radical departure from the standard vampire tropes that dominated the early 70s. Rather than a straightforward supernatural horror flick, it functions as a deeply layered, experimental meditation on addiction, cultural identity, and the existential weight of immortality. When an anthropologist is stabbed with an ancient, cursed blade, he undergoes a transformation that leaves him craving blood, a condition he treats not as a demonic curse, but as a sophisticated, agonizing addiction that parallels the societal struggles of the era. The visual language of the film is remarkably distinct, often eschewing jump scares for a dreamlike, impressionistic pace. Gunn treats the setting of a sprawling, opulent estate as a suffocating cage, using the environment to mirror the internal entrapment of his protagonists. Performances from Dwayne Jones and Marlene Clark provide a grounded, haunting contrast to the film's high-concept, avant-garde elements. It feels less like a movie and more like a fever dream, moving with an internal logic that demands patience and rewards deep engagement with its visual and thematic density. This project remains a pivotal artifact of Black independent cinema, refusing to cater to the exploitation tropes of the blaxploitation boom that were concurrently defining the market. It operates on its own terms, utilizing the vampire mythos as a vehicle to explore the complexities of class, desire, and the enduring scars of history. For those who prioritize atmosphere and intellectual weight over traditional genre beats, it stands as a singular, uncompromising vision that continues to challenge audiences decades after its initial, misunderstood release. Alice, Sweet Alice, 1976. A child is killed inside a church during a First Communion ceremony, and suspicion quickly turns toward her older sister, a troubled, withdrawn kid known for strange behavior and a blank, unreadable stare. Witnesses report seeing a small figure in a yellow raincoat and clear plastic mask moving through the building. From there, fear spreads through the neighborhood and inside the family itself. The story stays close to the mother as she's forced to question what she believes about her own daughter. Rumors grow, accusations stack up, and each new incident deepens the uncertainty. Is the obvious suspect really responsible? Or is something else hiding behind the disguise? Directed by Alfred Soule, the film leans heavily into religious atmosphere. Catholic imagery, ritual spaces, and community tension all play a central role in the mood. The performance from the girl at the center of suspicion is especially effective, uncomfortable, vulnerable, and unpredictable in a way that keeps the audience off balance. A very young Brooke Shields appears briefly as the younger sister in her screen debut. The horror here is more psychological than graphic. Moments of violence are present, but the lasting impact comes from paranoia, guilt, and the sense that no one fully understands what's happening until it's too late. The raincoat and mask look would go on to become one of the more recognizable proto-slasher visuals of the decade. This is a grim, slow-burn thriller that bridges psychological horror and early slasher structure, and it still feels raw compared to many later entries in the subgenre. If you're enjoying the video so far, take a second to like and subscribe, and let us know your favorite in the comments. Now, let's keep going. Vampire Circus, 1972. A cursed village faces supernatural revenge when a traveling circus arrives 15 years after the townspeople destroyed a vampire. The performers are all vampires or their servants, targeting the descendants of those who participated in the original staking. Hammer Films delivers one of their stranger entries, blending Gothic horror with circus spectacle and psychedelic visuals unusual for the studio. Adrian Corey, Anthony Higgins, and John Mulder Brown populate the vampire circus with performers who seduce and destroy with theatrical flair. The circus setting allows for creative staging, trapeze artists who transform mid-flight, a Hall of Mirrors sequence where reflections don't match reality, a panther that's really a shape-shifting vampire. Robert Young directs with more visual experimentation than typical Hammer productions, using colored lighting and distorted angles. The practical transformation effects are ambitious for Hammer, with vampires changing into animals through dissolve effects and makeup work. The mirror maze sequence is particularly effective, using practical sets and careful blocking to create disorienting space where reality becomes unreliable. The village's plague subplot adds another layer of dread. They're already suffering when the vampires arrive to finish them. The film's sexual frankness pushes beyond Hammer's usual restraint, with the circus performers using seduction as hunting method. Vampire Circus represents Hammer attempting to modernize their formula with contemporary filmmaking techniques while maintaining their Gothic roots, creating something that feels transitional between their classic period and attempts to remain relevant in changing horror landscape. Black Magic, 1975. This is a wild, dizzying plunge into the world of Shaw Brothers-produced supernatural horror. Unlike the Gothic, atmosphere-heavy chillers coming out of Europe at the time, this film leans heavily into hyper-violent, inventive, and often grotesque practical effects. The story centers on a man who employs black magic to manipulate his way into a woman's life, only to find himself locked in an escalating duel of curses, spells, and horrific transformations with a rival sorcerer. It is essentially a combat film, but instead of kung fu strikes, the characters trade volleys of hexes that result in visceral, stomach-churning body horror. The film is a visual barrage, saturated with the bright theatrical colors synonymous with the Shaw Brothers' studio aesthetic. What separates it from standard genre fare is its sheer audacity. It refuses to follow the slow-burn pacing of Western supernatural films, opting instead to assault the viewer with a relentless parade of bizarre set pieces, from cursed statues to demonic possession. It is a messy, energetic, and highly entertaining spectacle that treats its occult subject matter with a strange, dark glee. For viewers unaccustomed to the specific rhythm of 70s Hong Kong genre cinema, the tone shift, from romantic melodrama to visceral, gore-soaked nightmare, can be jarring. However, that shift is exactly what makes the film a cult staple. It doesn't rely on shadows to hide its monsters. It puts them front and center in vivid, gore-drenched detail. For fans of practical effects, inventive lore, and the singular energy of mid-70s Eastern exploitation, it is an essential, if deeply strange, piece of cinema. Witchhammer, 1970. Czechoslovakia, 1678. An inquisitor arrives in a rural region to investigate reports of witchcraft, and what starts as questioning quickly spirals into mass hysteria. Accusations spread like a disease. Neighbors denounce neighbors. Confessions are extracted through torture, and the trials become a machinery of death that cannot be stopped. While a local priest attempts to protest the insanity, he finds himself caught in the same lethal web. By the end, dozens are burned at the stake. The film doesn't sensationalize. It presents the trials as bureaucratic horror, where legal procedure becomes an instrument of mass murder. The lead inquisitor is portrayed with chilling, predatory opportunism. He is a man who recognizes that fear is a ladder to wealth and influence. The moral heart of the film is a local dean, a man of reason who realizes too late that the system has no interest in the truth and eventually becomes a victim of the very machine he tried to slow down. The torture sequences are staged with uncomfortable realism. Thumbscrews, racks, and methods designed to extract any confession the questioners want to hear. The burnings are depicted matter-of-factly, emphasizing the routine nature of execution. The film is shot in stark black and white that emphasizes the period's bleakness, using actual castle locations that provide an authentic, claustrophobic atmosphere. Released in the wake of the Prague Spring, it's as much about Stalinist show trials as historical witch hunts. The parallels to forced confessions and state terror are deliberate and devastating. The film was banned by the authorities shortly after its release, not resurfacing fully until the 1990s. It's slow, grim, and refuses any Hollywood heroics. This is horror as a historical document, showing how systems designed to purify society will manufacture evil when none exists. Devil's Nightmare, 1971. Belgian horror from Jean Brismet follows 7 tourists stranded overnight in a Gothic castle whose owner harbors dark family history, a curse requiring one family member per generation to serve as succubus. As the guests settle in, a beautiful woman arrives and begins systematically targeting each visitor, exploiting their specific sins to claim their souls. Each death corresponds to one of the 7 deadly sins in this morality play, disguised as exploitation horror. Erica Blanc plays the succubus with seductive menace, appearing to each guest in forms that appeal to their particular weaknesses: greed, lust, pride, envy. The tourists are drawn broadly enough to embody their assigned sins while remaining functional characters rather than simple archetypes. Daniel Emilfork brings sinister presence as the castle's owner, clearly complicit but helpless, to stop the curse claiming new victims. The castle setting provides appropriately Gothic atmosphere. Stone corridors, shadowy chambers, and hidden passages where the succubus stalks her prey. The death sequences are creative, each tailored to both the victim's sin and their personal fears. The film's religious framework gives the horror moral dimension beyond typical slasher logic, though it never becomes preachy or heavy-handed. The practical effects range from subtle to spectacular, particularly the succubus's true demonic form revealed in brief glimpses. The film's pacing allows each guest their moment before the inevitable fall, building dread as the survivors realize the pattern. The climax involves genuine theological stakes as a priest among the guests attempts to combat demonic forces. Devil's Nightmare represents European horror's willingness to blend religious allegory with exploitation elements, creating something that's simultaneously morality tale and creature feature. It's modest but effective Gothic horror that takes its theological framework seriously while delivering genre thrills. The Night Digger, 1971, also known as The Bliss of Mrs. Blossom's darker cousin, The Night Digger is a stark British psychological thriller that often slips under the radar of genre enthusiasts. It follows a lonely, middle-aged woman living in a secluded country house with her overbearing, blind mother. Their fragile, stagnant existence is shattered by the arrival of a mysterious young drifter who begins working for them. What starts as a quiet character study slowly curdles into something much more predatory as the drifter's true violent nature begins to seep into the household's suffocating routine. The film is anchored by a genuinely haunting performance from Patricia Neal, whose weary, fragile presence provides a perfect counterpoint to the calculated menace of the newcomer. Director Alistair Reed avoids the histrionics of contemporary horror, opting instead for a slow-burn, observational approach that makes the impending violence feel inevitable rather than exploited. The film's pacing is deliberate and cold, emphasizing the isolation of the English countryside and the deep-seated psychological rot that can fester when people are forced to live in such forced, uncomfortable proximity. What makes The Night Digger linger is its refusal to offer easy answers or cathartic moments of terror. It is a film about the intersection of loneliness and sociopathy, where the monster isn't a supernatural entity, but a deeply damaged human being operating in the shadows of a repressed society. For those who appreciate horror that prioritizes character-driven tension and a persistent sense of unease, this is a masterful, understated piece of 70s suspense that explores the darkness hiding just beneath the surface of the domestic mundane. If you love discovering forgotten horror and cult cinema, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the films time forgot. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.